welcome back to the European Tour Picks and Bet Show. As you can tell, I am not Skylar Hope, so new host this week. Skylar is out in Hawaii, but luckily for me, I'm joined by Ryan Baroff. Ryan, welcome.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Nice to stand in for Sky, but I wish he was here and I was in Maui.
It would be nice
happy
to switch.
be here.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, look, you're in the position where you get to nod and smile, and I'm not going to make these kind of strange amateur picks that Skylar does. I've gone pretty top heavy this week, but I think we're coming to a golf course, which I think you all agree on. What we've spoken about so far, that you do tend to lean course history here, and not even so much great results, just a little bit of experience. I think we've seen guys that have missed cuts but learned something the first time they played here, and come back and really develop from that. Even if it was a kind of, you saw them shoot a 68 or a 69, just kind of break through a little bit. I don't want to compare it to Augusta, obviously, but you hear this all the time. Someone breaks 70 for the first time at Augusta, and it's go time. And I think that's a little bit like that at Valderrama.
Yeah, for sure. I think leading on course experience is important. Like we talked about course fit, right? I think this is a course where we're going to kind of disregard the model to an extent, or weigh course history and course fit, quite a bit more. And you look at a guy like Sergio, who's obviously not here this week. It took him a decade before he figured this place out and actually won, and then he won 3 times, right? So I think that's the sort of course we have this week.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I made myself sound like a little bit stupid on the podcast last night, where I said it took Sergio a while to figure out, Valderrama. Of course, he didn't. He was kind of top 7 after the first couple of starts. But what I kind of meant by that was it took him so long to break through when it looked such a good fit for him. And, it's just one of those places that I wouldn't discount anybody. I mean, we're going to go into a couple of guys like yourself. You've got on your card a guy that's missed a cut here twice. But one wasn't playing very well in the build-up to both times. And 2, I think, it just takes a little time to figure it out. Like, people would have discarded Wilco Nineaver last year because he bombs it all over the place, and he finishes tied 6th. So it's just, there are different ways to do it. I don't think you can just bomb and gadget around here, because you're going to get stuck behind trees, you're going to have runoffs off the greens, etc. But it just pays to have had a look at the place and kind of learn something from the first time you visited.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's that balance between pure course history and then the actual course fit. We'll talk about the bets in a little bit, but just continue to ride the hot iron players and the good scramblers, because that's what you'll need here this week.
What would be your thoughts on someone? I mean, there's not a whole lot of guys that have come into this. I think quite a lot have played here, but would someone playing this for the first time put you off? I mean, there's a couple of guys like Nicolai Højgaard and Judge Janner Watson on, people like Hyton Lee, and a guy on your card actually we'll come to later on that are playing for the first time. Would that put you off at all?
It should. But I'm a sucker for that guy, so we'll get there.
Okay.
No, so I mean, like you saw John Catlin last year, obviously missed the cut the first time playing here, and then figured out and kind of won last year. I think it's a tough golf course, so the conditions will dictate that to an extent. I think it takes a certain type of golfer who can win an event at +2, +3, +4, which we might see again. But ultimately, yes, I definitely need experience more than the first timers here.
And that's the thing with the experience as well, I suppose, is to make that point, is John Catlin didn't have good experience here, right? He shot a 72 and a 74 and, finished in 88th place to miss the cut the first time he was here. So he didn't have anything promising. It's just that he's seen the course, knew what it was next time he come around. And you mentioned winning an over par score. He shot 4 under on the final day to win. I know there's a little bit of Keimer not doing the goods behind him and a couple of guys, failing to make a charge, but it's a completely different mindset to go into the week dropping shots and still kind of climbing like places. I think Sammy Valimaki was 8 over after the first day, or 6 over after the first day, and still finished inside the top 10 last year.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, for us, it's fun to watch. I think I had Lorenzo Gagli last year, who was there and then just completely ejected on Sunday, but still very enjoyable to watch. There are double bogeys, triple bogeys looming every single hole. Even potentially from the middle of the fairway, right? I mean, you miss a green with a wedge in the wrong spot. You have the overhanging trees, you've got the bunkers, you got tiny greens, firm greens, fast greens. So yeah, it should be fun to watch this weekend.
Yeah, and let's go to the top of the board here at the Andalucia Masters. Obviously, we're at Valderrama, as we mentioned, 7,028 yards, par 71. As we talked about, it's not really about distance, but Jon Rahm is the obvious favourite here at 3-1, I guess is the biggest price, maybe so a little bit bigger than that. Matthew Fitzpatrick at 16-1, Bernd Wiesberger 22-1, Matthias Schwab 28-1, and Martin Keimer at 33-1. I guess there was some guys that kind of stood out to you there. But what we spoke off air about Bernd Wiesberg. What was it that kind of made you decide to opt against him in the end?
Just I shouldn't say lack of winning upside, because the guy's won a handful of times on the European Tour pretty recently. It just seems like he's getting off to these slower starts. And this is a course where I feel like a lot of guys are in play, and that we have a pretty deep field, right? I think there are plenty of guys in the 50, 60, 70, 80 range who have legitimately win equity here. And again, I expect Bernd to play fine, make the cut. He'll be in the top 20 at some point this weekend, but I just don't see the winning upside here.
And I think what you say there as well is really important, like the slow start. Like for John Rahm's not going to be a slow starter. He started really well last week and was, I think, he was odds on to win after like 6 holes, but he had that one bad round. You really just can't afford to do that. I mean, Andrew Johnston won here in 2016. I think he was second, first. John Catlin led all the way, I think, and Soren Kjeldsen as well is another course winner here, led all the way. So the 3 course winners here in the field have all kind of basically gone wire to wire, have been very close. So I think despite the fact you can drop shots, I think you need to always be in that kind of position all the way along. And I just don't know if Bernd Wiesberg has got 4 rounds, and I guess that was a kind of concern for you. Yeah,
for sure. And I think, again, for a DraftKings play, I think that's a great place to start your lineups. I actually probably like him a little more than John Rahm. Rahm is about the same price as he was last week, and last week was a much weaker field, right? Much stronger field. He's still over $12,000 this week, and I think it really makes it tough because there's not a lot down in the 6s that I like this week. So if I use Bernd, it'll be as the start of a DraftKings team.
Yeah, and I suppose with John Rahm as well is that he's coming off a week where you can only say it was disappointment, right? Like he was poor over the weekend. He finished 17th, which to any other golfer in the world would be a steady week, but to him it's a disappointment, and that's he's a victim of his own success. But the course was perfect for him last week. Like he could, even when he was spraying it, he could have got himself out of trouble. It's just the rest of it wasn't great. And if he has even one of those rounds this week, he's going to get caught out so much. So in terms of betting, me and Sky would never go near a 3-1 shot anyway. And I'm sure you're pretty much the same looking at your betting cards most week. But what about kind of like Matt Fitzpatrick? Was there any temptation? I know you're obviously a big fan of his. Would you have gone there?
So, I mean, course fit wise, obviously makes a lot of sense. He just doesn't seem right. Obviously didn't play much and didn't play that well at the Ryder Cup until the singles match. He made a bunch of birdies against Daniel Berger. Just he ran into a better player. But he just hasn't seemed right the last few months. Not really contending, really not even close to the top 20 most weeks. So it's a pass for me in terms of the outright bet.
Yeah, I think he was great earlier on in the PGA Tour season, and I was getting quite excited about him for because I think that is it's the natural progression, right? Like he's done it on the European Tour, he won big, and he doesn't need to prove anything there, but he still needs to make this step up. He's touted as a major winner, and he's got an experienced caddy on the bag. There's no real excuses not to make that step up at the PGA Tour. Matthias Schwab obviously making a drop down in class now, I'd say. Obviously he's getting his PGA Tour card. He has a great course fit, but he's just someone in terms of winning upside at the moment, I'm still not quite sure. Having said that, I start my card with Martin Keimer. This is a guy that hasn't won, I think, 7 years now, is it, since the 2014 US Open. But like we said, he should have won here last year. He's been, electric at this golf course. And I just think that you have to decide whether you believe that Martin Keimer can come back. Like we just seen Lee Westwood do it over the last couple of years. The Ryder Cup invigorated him. Did it have the same effects on Martin Keimer? We won't know. But 2 second-place finishes, 2 sixth-place finishes, never missed a cut, always inside the top 30. I think that Keimer is just a safe bet to get through to the weekend. And I just think now, just maybe the pressure of being, I don't know if there's pressure of being a vice captain or whether it's something that stays on your mind, but I think being in that team room, he'll now just want to make sure he's there in Rome in 2 years' time. And maybe this is just where he starts that run.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we saw a couple of these guys. Luke Donald played well after the vice captaincy. And even Graham McDowell, I think it was the Dutch Open, he played right before, but he did make the cut last week at the Shriners. So, yeah, you never know. And Keimer is obviously, a proven world-class winner, loves this golf course. He probably was due for a win last year. I don't know if we're still extending that through this year, but would certainly not surprise me to see him up there this weekend.
No, and it's one of those ones where I just had a really, really hard time going to because of the price being short. But you just have to respect. I was spoken about the course history, the course fit, and you look at the profile of the winners. I mean, Graham McDowell, you mentioned, obviously won here in 2010. Sergio Garcia's won it 3 times on the trot. And then Christian Bezuidenhout won in 2019, who's obviously going on to be what many believe could be a major contender. John Catlin, maybe not quite out of the top draw, but a very, very proven winner very quickly, in bunches. So you're looking at guys that are just real top class. And the first guy that you came to on your board, and Richard Bland, is certainly trying to fit that kind of profile later on in his career at 48 years of age.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the European Tour put out a tweet earlier, maybe it's yesterday, maybe this morning, but 10, 11 cuts since his win, right? So you think there's oftentimes a big letdown after that. But even the very next week in Denmark, I think he tied for third. And he's just kind of maintained that form, like always in the top 10, always in the top five, and has even thrown some very low rounds in there. So from what I know about him, which again, more this year than in years past, but he seems to be really good on these shorter courses, these tougher courses, firm, fast links courses, right? We saw that he won the British Masters, played well at the Scottish, played well last week, played well at the Alfred Dunhill Link. So it seems to make a lot of sense. And we've talked about that your driving distance really doesn't matter here, right? All about accuracy. Richard Bland is obviously a very short hitter, but a very accurate hitter. He historically loses strokes off the tee, which again, I think is not going to be that important this week. And if you look back to kind of what he did last week, he was 6 tee to green, number 5 for approach, gained around the green and gained putting. So really, it was only the off the tee game last week that really held him back. So, and then lastly, I mean, you look at the course history, he's made 4 or 5 cuts here. His form has actually been going backwards in progression, but I think we can all agree that he's a much better player now than he was any other time in his career.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there is the fact that he's making the cuts and generally seems to like the course, despite the fact the results maybe not being the best, but he is just a completely different prospect. And we'll go through that in terms of the players we're going on later on the board. But I don't think you can find your game here. Like, this is a golf course that demands you having some sort of form on the lead in. And with Richard Bland, the way that he was over the years, that wasn't always the case. I mean, he's been ultra consistent this year, as one of the other guys has been going into this. You just can't. I mean, you just can't find anything here. You just need to have your irons hot. Your driver, you want to hit it straight, but that can be negated here. So I think it's just a case of playing the guys that are in hot form. And one of those guys that I sort of came across was Andrew Johnston. And one of the things with Andrew Johnston, apart from the fact that I hate everyone just calling him Beef by default. I mean, it's a great name, but it does kind of detract from the fact that he's actually a very good golfer. And the one thing that concerned me, right, and I guess it's not a nice thing to be concerned with, but he had a lot of off the course issues. Like, he had a lot of mental health issues. He was quite open about it, as Matthew Wolff has been. And for me, that kind of is a bit of a red flag, because you never know whether he's going to be right each week. And it's a horrible thing to think, but in terms of actually just breaking down the bare bones, you do have to consider that. And I think that there was a lot of success fast. He got caught up in all the hoopla in America, and he was having all these RB deals and things like that. Whereas this year, it just seems to be that he's got back into it and he's just ready to play golf. And for me, I mean, the results speak for themselves this year. He's already had kind of like a tied fourth, a tied ninth, a tied sixth at Wentworth, tied 24th last week on a golf course that didn't really suit in terms of what he does. I think he likes it tougher. I think that he wants to demand on those hot irons, and even around the green, he's a great prospect as well. So for me, the fact that he can progress up the field with level par or maybe even 1 or 2 under is a really good thing for him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for me, it was more of price. I don't feel comfortable betting him down in the 40s, which is where he was. Probably over 60, probably would have piqued my interest. But yeah, I think, again, I've bet him a few times this year. The irons have just been awesome. As usual for him, it's, the 4-footers and the 5-footers. And I think even like a lot of people are going to use the Omega European Masters as a comp here. And he tied for 60th, but if you look into it, he started 68, 66, right? Played really well for 2 rounds. So that result is probably better than it looks. Played solid last week, like you mentioned, played really well at the BMW. So, and of course, he's won here. So I definitely see the merit for it.
Yeah, let's come on to a guy that there is no question marks really about him in terms of Shubhankar Sharma. I've sort of been alluding to him most of the show, in the sense that he's got a pretty average record here, which I think has kept his price at a really good number. I mean, my co-host on the Lost Words podcast, he mentioned to me on Sunday what price is Sharma going to be this week, and I immediately just hit like 40-1. Like that's kind of the number I thought. And there was some 80s. I mean, he's down to sort of 66, 70-1 this week, but I think that's a pretty good number on a guy that is hitting his irons and driver as well as anyone.
Yeah, we actually, so here we saw the opposite. He opened at 50 and then drifted back to 66, which is where I grabbed him. And, I think that's a fair number. I think it's a great number, really. So as we know, he's been ultra consistent, really all carried by the iron play, which is obviously very important this week. And his short game is fine, right? He's usually pretty solid around the green. I'm not overly worried about the putting. Like Richard Bland, the weakness has been off the tee, right? Where he usually loses because of distance and potentially because of accuracy. But I think, again, when you come to Valderrama, you come to certain courses like this, you can get away with it, right? Like the first time we really saw him was when he won the event over in Malaysia. And you look at that course and the characteristics and the types of guys he and Fabrizio Zanotti who have won there, makes a lot of sense here, right? So really, the iron play has just been out of this world. He was number 1 tee to green last week, and Sky will tell you and Access will tell you I'm a sucker for what they did last week, especially tee to green. And he was number 1. My next guy was number 2, and I'm just going to keep riding that because it certainly worked for me.
And I think the thing is as well that there is obviously a concern that there's some recency bias, right? Can they keep hot? But, we're talking about a guy that's coming into what we analyze is a great course fit for him. The numbers where he hasn't beaten, I don't think, 76 in 4 rounds here suggests that he doesn't play well. But you look into his leading form those 2 years, and there was just a bunch of miscuts. Like he was a guy that really suffered from success early, like a bit like Andrew Johnson in the sense he kind of played well at that WGC in Mexico, and his profile just raised the roof. And all of a sudden, you're trying to contend and play well at a golf course that demands. It's not so much even a particular style of play in terms of irons around the green, etc. It's the mental test. Like you cannot check out of Valderrama, and if you've got a lot of things going on like Sharma Wood has done over his 2 years, it's really hard to keep the score busy.
Yeah, and I think what I like about him too is we've seen him win, right? He's got 2 European Tour wins, one on the Asian Tour, plenty, right? When he kind of spiked, we saw him play well at the World Golf Championship, played in big events and done really good things. And I think he's now getting back up to that level where he was after a really bad 18 months or so.
Yeah, and the other course comps that kind of get floated around are Wentworth. I think that's more of a big style of event, and it is a little bit Parkland there and tight, but he was tied 9th there not so long ago. And the Hong Kong Open has been flagged up a lot as well. He's got 2 top 10s there. So I think for Sharma, it's a great corollary course fit thing.
Yeah, and he seems to sprinkle in one bad round, right? Each week, like 66, 66, 66, 75, right? So one, hopefully we can get rid of that. But 2, on a course that's challenging like this, if you shoot a 74, you're not out of it, right? Yeah. And I think that'll certainly help him this week. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that everyone's going to drop shots, and he can kind of get away with that. Whereas he's been playing so well in these kind of low-scoring birdie fests that you can't afford to stop completely. So I think that'll suit him. Another guy that I kind of think is a perfect course fit is Sean Crocker, and he's had a couple of goes around here. There was concern about his foot last week after an injury at Dunhill Links. He fell down a hole, had an MRI, but he seems in pretty good spirits. I think he is ready to come back. My concern with Crocker, and the reason I've kind of stuck with him is because I've been talking all year about his price going out and grabbing it when it does, going to a course where putting doesn't matter as much, and I think that's a key here. The worry is that his around the green game suffers a lot as well, and that could cost him, but I thought the number is decent enough.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you talk about a guy who is way overdue for a win. It's certainly Sean Crocker, but yeah, you mentioned it. Like, he's going to give himself a lot of 15-footers for birdie this week and probably some for par, and it's just a matter of how many of them he can make.
Absolutely. Give us your guy that we kind of spoke about that hadn't played here.
I think so kind of like Sean Crocker, right? Yeah. In terms of kind of their game. But yeah, Jordan Smith seems, so he, like Sharma, kind of fell off last year, was missing a lot of cuts, just never quite got in the rhythm with the new calendar. But he's back. He's back and playing well. And the thing that I really like about Jordan Smith this week, even though he's never played here, is it's not a course where you need to shoot 20 under, right? His bugaboo, of course, is putting. He does not make putts. He does not make a lot of birdies, except when he's just kind of lights out. So I think that's number one. Is it's going to be a score where I think he can get to. The ball striking, again, was great last week. He was number 2 tee to green, but I think he was number 1 ball striking in terms of off the tee plus approach, which is huge. And so recently, with the recent form, we actually have seen him play well at a tough golf course, right? The Porsche European Open, which was very tough, only 3 rounds. He tied for 11th there. Earlier this year, he was 3rd in Denmark, which another short, kind of narrow course. Porsche European Open, he was 11th. He was 3rd at the ISPS Handa. He was 9th at the Kazoo Classic. So he's kind of been there. And again, he's a guy who has won before, albeit a couple of years ago. I think now 4 years ago. But he's shown that he has the game where he can win. And I think 80 to 1 is a very, very fair price here.
Yeah, I mean, I like some of the places where he played well before in the British Masters, at Wentworth again. You know, he has that perfect game. And if you look at the debutants, he's probably the one that you'd expect to make the most inroads. And I like what you say, you know, he doesn't need to make a bunch of putts, right? He's going to have to make putts. You know, you need to make par saves to keep the momentum going. But smaller greens, like, you know, you're not going to have these really long 3-putt opportunities, which, you know, generally cost him. I don't think he's terrible around the greens. I don't know how you see that, but he doesn't look awful around the greens. He seems pretty good. Passes the eye test, certainly. It's just that his irons should stay hot and he should be in the middle of the fairway most times.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for him, you know, the only thing that kind of concerns me is that he typically gains the most strokes off the tee, which I think will be negated a little bit. But
yeah,
I mean, the irons have been so good for the last 10 events that I'm just hoping to ride that form and just catch a half decent putting week.
Yeah, another guy that I need. It's strange, you know, normally I associate him with bad putting, and it's Richie Ramsey. Is that he, at the moment, he's not missing any one thing. It's kind of, he finds it all in odd weeks. So if his ball striking's good, his putting's bad. If his putting's good, his ball striking, he never seems to be able to piece it together. But he's coming to a golf course now where he's just been superb, really. He was 3rd on debut, 29th and 11th subsequently, and then 1 missed cut. But he looks like he's coming back to his fore. Like he looks like he can contend, and it just matters about course fit. Like he's a guy that isn't going to contend every week. Like, you know, I've spoken to him in the past, and he knows there's probably 5, 6, 7 events a year where he can probably win, and he needs to be hot at that time. And I just think he's rounding into a good bit of form at the right time and can play a golf course. I mean, he strikes me as someone as a true sort of lover of the golf game that would really relish winning at Valderrama.
Yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. You know, I was on the late end of his run this summer, where everyone seemed to hop on for some reason, and I was just getting crushed by the Richie Ramsey chalk. And of course, I played and bet him at Crans and then in Rome, and he had 2 missed cuts. So yeah, certainly expect him to make the cut, probably be around the top 20 here. Does he have the winning upside? I mean, maybe not, but yeah, perfect golf course for him, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple of other guys that, you know, Will Besseling was very good on his debut here, was pretty good last week, albeit had a bad Saturday and didn't get away with it. And then Michael Lorenzo Vera as well, who's, you know, 2 starts here, was 6th and 2nd. Like that's, you know, that is really impressive. And he's a guy that has come back to form in recent weeks, does just tend to repeat form. So those would be 2 guys down the lower end of the board where I think would be some decent value.
Yeah, for sure. I did bet Will Besseling as well. I think, you know, the course form from last time, I think that definitely stood out. What he did last week stood out. And even that was with a bad weekend, right? He started, I think, 66, 68, something like that, and was kind of near the top, leading for a couple of days, and then kind of tailed off there. He also was tied for 13th at the Omega Masters, which I think, again, a great comp course in terms of short, narrow, and the firm greens and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, Mike Lorenzo Vera, I think one of those ones where you just throw out the model because he has been bad for the last year and a half, but loves this golf course. Last week, kind of popped for a top 20. What I really liked last week is he gained in all 4 categories, right? So I think that's a sign that he's kind of clicking, and he's certainly a guy that I like for a top 10 this week.
So my only concern with, like you mentioned, with kind of Smith and stuff like that, is he does gain a lot of strokes off the tee, and his irons haven't been super hot. But just, I think sometimes I'm guilty of it. Like if someone hasn't had a good approach week, like I kind of just jump straight off. And I think it's been good enough, right? Like you just said, he gained strokes, and then he's going to come to a golf course where he obviously likes. He's shown that last week, and it's such a unique test. Like it's such a different, you know, you're going to gain strokes if you're just getting it on the greens this week. Like, you know, you don't have to be super close to the hole all the time. I just think that's a good fit for Besseling to, you know, break through, because it has been coming really.
Yeah, for sure. And I like him too. He almost won, I think it was the Alfred Dunhill Championship, right, down in South Africa. And that's where Sharma's won. And I like Sharma this week. So just another kind of correlation that I'm making there. But so I think one other guy that I just quickly wanted to mention, because he was last off my list, purely because I just don't see the win equity. But what do you think about Jamie Donaldson here?
So Jamie Donaldson is someone I've gone back and forth on an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And I think that he is a guy that, he's got an awful lot of experience here. And my concern with Jamie Donaldson is that, like, I spent last year watching him kind of roll around on the floor with a really terrible back. But all of a sudden, it just seems, I said to Sky a couple of weeks ago that it's like he's had 3 careers. Like, he had a very early on modest European Tour career. Then he went through that little winning stage and the Ryder Cup, and then he nearly cut his hand off and was terrible for a little while and has his back issues. But he's got a decent course history here, 10th and a 4th. Before that, he had was making cuts. So I think Jamie Donaldson is someone that would certainly not surprise me if he was in the mix.
Yeah. Cool. We'll got through the bets. Do you want to rattle off some DraftKings names here?
Yeah, I mean, as a guy that knows how to play DraftKings, because I certainly am not going to be giving advice for game theory. There's only one of us that's won big GPPs and things like that in this thing. What would you do at the Andalucia Masters? How does your strategy change here? Do you think you need to have a balanced approach because you need to get guys in there that have this kind of course experience, or do you think you can take a flyer lower down?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that is the first decision is what do you do with Jon Rahm, right? And I thought last week was a lot easier because the field was weaker and you could make a pretty solid team with Jon Rahm. Like, I could fit Adri with Jon Rahm last week very easily. You can't do that this week and not kind of mortgage the rest of your lineup. So I am most likely going to take the balanced approach. We talked about like the guys like Bland and Schwab and Andrew Johnston. I think that's the range that you want to fall into. I think one of the hardest things with the European Tour contest is trying to figure out the ownership, right? Because there's not a ton of content out there. I mean, this podcast and Ben Coley's article really do drive the GPP ownership. That's just the way it goes. Ben, of course, he's on Schwab this week. He's on Aaron Rai this week. So I would expect guys like that to probably be popular, and that balanced build may be popular. So I think when that happens, you just have to kind of go with your own thing and play the guys that you like, right? Like, I'm going to play Sharma. I'm going to play Jordan Smith. I don't expect them to be overly popular. I oftentimes leave money on the table for the European Tour stuff too, because when the recreational GPP players have guys who they don't know that well, they're certainly going to max out their salary more than often. And so that'd be my kind of main advice is just play the guys you want to play. Don't max out the salary and just try and be a little bit unique.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that there is an edge to be had on the European Tour if you know the guys further down the field. I think that is a massive thing. And like you say, you can leave salary on the table. For me, I was always, when I first came over to the UK, I was very much like, right, I've put up 4 bets. Let's put 4 of those guys in the lineup and fill in the gaps. And it never really seemed to pay off for me. It was kind of a bit of a risky approach, but we've just been talking here, and I kind of just started my lineup with Keimer and Johnston, 2 people that I like. A guy that I think we both bet last week in Justin Harding could be a good play at $8,000. I don't really want to go back to the well too many times, but then Sharma, Nineaver, and Donaldson all fit in that lineup. Doesn't leave much on the table. It doesn't leave anything on the table. It's $100. But if I swap one of those out for Jordan Smith, do you think that would be the better approach?
Yeah. So I mean, even $100, like, you're going to be a little more unique there than you would be if you maxed it out, or if you even want to drop down to Mike Lorenzo Vera, who's another $300 and leave $400 on the table. Like, I think that would work too. And I don't think MLV is going to be more than 1 or 2% on this week.
No, absolutely not. Well, let's just go to the fact that people are going to want to play Jon Rahm. They are going to put Adriano. I've seen that. Let's look for some 7 guys and below. What do you make of Julian Gourier last week? I thought he was pretty impressive over the weekend, considering he's not been in the arena very often. I thought he, made some positive steps. Okay, he went backwards from 2nd to 3rd on the final day, but didn't drop off a cliff too much. Yeah,
I mean, I play him more than I should. I always had this vision of him being, a big off the tee guy, long driver. Maybe he is to an extent, but he definitely has shown more than that, right?
Yeah.
I think with any of these guys, it's always the putting and the short game that's the worry, but he tends to kind of stay there when he's there. He doesn't win, but he'll kind of round out the week and finish 5th or 6th or 3rd like he did last week. So, and he's made both cuts here. So I think you could certainly do worse for 7,000.
And that's the thing. I think there's a whole host of guys like that, and it gets kind of worrying when you see some of these names. I mean, Alvaro Quiros is someone that's going to be, very, very popular. I'd imagine people have read Ben Coley's article. He's a guy that's played very well here, advancing on to the years. And I guess the good thing with Alvaro Quiros is that he, like Wilco Ninehaber and people like that, doesn't appear to have the best strategy for this, yet still yields some results.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of guys like that, right? In terms of guys who are pretty good players, but may not be the accurate hitters that you're looking for, but are very cheap this week. Like you talk about a guy like Minwoo Lee, right? He's 7,400. He played okay last week. Obviously won the Scottish. If he plays well and makes this cut, like he could be in the top 5 and make a ton of birdies and for sure be on the DK optimal lineup, right? Or he can shoot +7 the first day and be out of it. And I think those are the risks that you have to take on DraftKings, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, you want guys to play well, but you need birdies and you need eagles. And obviously Minwoo Lee is the type of player who can do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of names here that have just been playing well recently. Jack Senior, 6,800. Houghton Lee's returning to a bit of form, likes this golf course, playing for the first time, so we don't know really what we're going to get. I guess he'd be pretty risky at 6,600. And then you've just got a couple of guys like Connor Syme. Mark Warren broke his cut, his missed cut streak last week as well in the top 10. So I think there are guys. Ashley Chester's makes cuts here and plays very well in Spain in general. So I guess the temptation is not to go. I think once you start getting down to like 6,400 and someone sees Sami Välimäki play well so well last year and sort of shoehorn him in because of John Rahm, I think there's got to be a distinctive cutoff point at kind of 6,600 and below.
Yeah, I mean, I think Connor Syme makes a lot of sense in terms of he's made 3 cuts here, played really well last week, except for Saturday, right? He shot 3 really good rounds, including, I think it was -6 on Sunday, which was huge and got him kind of back near the top 20, 25. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of my all-time favorites for 6,200, GFC. I mean, you talk about a golf course where you want experience, where accuracy matters and distance doesn't matter. And he hasn't really been that bad, right? He doesn't have the upside, but I could see him in the top 25 this week. And he's 6,200 and allows you to do a lot of different things.
So this guy was probably my favorite golfer for a little while getting into the European Tour. He used to win more than he should have done. And then I interviewed Simon Dyson, who obviously had a bit of a spat with him. Yeah. And, that puts a little bit of a sour in your mouth. But he was a guy that really struggled when he made the jump to America. He tried to get his PGA Tour card, really didn't, it just doesn't fit. And it was kind of like a, square peg at a round hole. It just wasn't the kind of place for him. And I think we're going to see that with someone like Aaron Rai. I think he's going to really struggle on the American side and then just play well when he comes back. And Castagno now is kind of settling in again. And I think that, like you say, I mean, he makes cuts here. Like I think he's missed 2 in 10 appearances maybe. There's never been anything too great. I think he's been 12th and he's had a couple of top 20s. But that's all you need from a guy at that price, right?
Yeah, I mean, anyone, under 66, except maybe Matthew Southgate, I think I would take GFC in terms of cut equity over pretty much anybody else here. I think that's how much course history matters, course fit matters. And then lastly, speaking of guys who may be back, but are not a good course fit, is Lucas Beauregard back? Is it happening?
So I called him back about maybe 7 events ago, and he made the cut and looked really good. And I think he actually was contending for a little while. And then it was kind of just driven by putting rather than his driving. But he looked good last week, right? He was, I think it was 4 rounds in the 60s last week. Yeah. And that is going to be key. And like you say, doesn't necessarily fit the course. But I think I don't know how you feel about it, but I think there's a couple of PGA Tour events like this. Like you see places like the Heritage and you see places like Sony Open where it's like, well, you don't need to be a long hitter, so it doesn't pay to be a big driver at all. And sometimes it does, because you can just take less than driver, hit irons off the tee and just be way down there as well and flick a wedge in. So I think that although he's missed 1 cut here, and that was like the only time he's visited it, he shot 81, 82, but that was 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Yeah. And he obviously hasn't come back because he's been in terrible form. And this is not a place you want to go out of confidence. I guess the fact that he's here is probably a good sign.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like you talk about guys with upside, right? Who can make birdies in bunches, streak, all 4 under 70. Like he's the type of player for DraftKings specifically that I can certainly get behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing now is that I guess my approach is similar to yours in the sense we probably want to go balanced, but these are guys that we just want to give out. I mean, Julian Suri was someone that plays well here, 6,500. His off the tee game has been appalling, which always used to be a strength of his. So again, maybe that's just something that gets negated here. Can help him. We know he can make birdies in bunches. Know you're a guy that likes Julian Suri as well. So I don't
way too much
want to play too many people down here. Yeah, I don't want to do it, and I don't want to shoehorn these guys in. But I think for if you desperately need someone, him, James Morrison, David Drysdale's played well. So I think there are guys down here. You mentioned Matthew Southgate. I think he's a great player overlooked. So yeah, I think there are names down here. I certainly wouldn't advise people going Jon Rahm, Arnaus, and a bunch of these guys because that would scare the living Jesus a bit. But there is signs that you can go lower down the board.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll throw one more out there just because I played him last week and he burned me. Daniel Gavins, who's been really good. Obviously, great Challenge Tour player, and then won one of his first events coming up to the main tour. And he was right there last week for a couple of rounds. And then he got the old MDF on Saturday where he shot about 80, didn't make a single birdie. I don't know what got into him because he played great all summer and for the first 2 rounds, and he just had a bad day. So, but he was flat 7 last week. Now he's 6,400 on a course again that, it should potentially suit him. And he made the cut here back in 2019. So.
Yeah, I think, we saw him. He was pretty decent at Wentworth for a couple of rounds. He finished 77th there, had a 76, 75 weekend. And much like you said last week as well. But the Alfred Dunhill Links, he looked like he was going to eject and then kind of pulled it back on the final round. I think that's a really good sign for a course like this as well. So Daniel Gavins, I like that at 6,400. So I think what we'll do there is just summarize our picks for the week. So I'll go first with Martin Kaymer at 30-1, Andrew Johnson at 45-1, Wilco Nineaber and Sean Crocker at 70s. I like your Will Besting play there at 70 as well. And Richard Ramsey at 100-1 are the guys that I'm definitely going to go with. Over to you, Ryan.
Yep, I got Bland at 40. I got Will Besseling in 70s, Sharma 80, Sharma 66. I wish I got the 80. Sharma 66, Jordan Smith 80.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be remiss if we didn't mention to subscribe to Daily Fantasy Sports and Mix on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, as they call it these days. And, Ryan, thank you very much for jumping in for Sky this week. It's going to be an extremely interesting week, if nothing else. It's a lovely course, great event, and hopefully we get some bets in.
Yeah, no, awesome. Thanks for having me. Happy to step in and help out anytime, but looking forward to Sky being back and getting more of those Spanish amateur gems that he throws out.
Yeah, sorry guys, we didn't throw those in this week. There isn't many 12-year-old amateurs playing this week, so Sky can bring those back next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, see ya.